And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this incredible panel discussion featuring some of the best minds and people in this country that are taking incredible time away from very important things to share their knowledge with us to try to react and respond in a meaningful way that will hopefully get to the people that need to hear this conversation. Now, guys, today, and before I move on, I'll just say that in the descriptions, I'll provide profile links to each person that is on this call. To my left is William K. Black, somebody that really needs no introduction for those who know him, but those who don't, Mr. Black is somebody who has been fighting fraud and corruption and waste and abuse for his entire career at the highest levels. He is similarly connected to the savings and loan crisis in a position where he and his colleagues had brought the rule of law into one of the largest fraud epidemics of that time period that would lead to 1,700 convictions of high level white collar fraud against some of the best defense attorneys in the country. Below him is his wife and partner, but she stands on her own in a very incredible way. June Carbone is a woman who is the Rabina Chair of Technology, Law, and Science at the University of Minnesota. She has incredible introspection and revelations that, by the way, I have been seeing play out in mainstream media every night. For example, last night on Chris Hayes, June, just to let you know, he made a shout out to your incredible argument about smashing and breaking things with the speed that they do in Silicon Valley, and almost making a verbatim argument of what you have been informing us about for the last several weeks, which I thought was quite amazing. But then I'll also include down below the descriptions of June's books and how you can read more of her prescient papers, academic papers. And then below me is Mark Dan, former Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. He's in private practice right now, but one of the strongest, shall I say, people in the game that have the capacity and the wherewithal to be able to go the distance with the corrupt actors, particularly as it relates to white collar fraud and the power of the big money. And as we get into this conversation, guys, this week has been moving fast and furious. I mean, today we've seen headlines that encompass Donald Trump's attack on the Department of Education. This off the heels of the last couple of days of what appears to be illegal, seizures of people to evict them from the country. Obviously, being done in a way that is antithetical to anything this country has stood for with the rule of law throughout our entire history. He has actually, through DOGE, been involved with having physical police presence, shutting down independent agencies of the federal government in a way that initially were unmarked marshals, as well as players from the FBI working alongside DOGE to take down government agencies illegally. And that's just the beginning. And on top of that, we saw I want to say Elias. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Bill? The gentleman, the law firm, or is it Weiss? I would think that the law firm. I'm going to look in the headline real quick. Paul,
the partner who split off from Perkins Coie, I think, is and does election law is probably Mark Elias.
no, but Paul Weiss, the chairman of
Oh,
Paul.
Paul White's firm.
No.
Okay, so they all sound alike.
Yeah,
All
so
these lawyers.
among other things. So ultimately, let's just start the conversation off, Bill. You know, what it's looking from where I'm sitting, and we've known this, and it's beyond even my comprehension. And I can obviously imagine a lot given everything that we've learned over the years. But the nature and the magnitude of this illegal behavior of a depraved presidency that represents a billionaire class that has completely decimated the rule of law. You know, where do you orient yourself, Bill, first, and how do you unpack it?
Okay, so first, I have these three hats come together in this discussion: the white collar criminologist, the lawyer, and the professor of economics for decades and such. And it does start out in the savings and loan debacle, because in the savings and loan debacle, what we had was, in military speak, the correlation of forces was really bad, right? So we had a majority of the House of Representatives co-sponsoring a resolution telling us to stop re-regulating the industry, which would have produced a catastrophe, right? And we had every senior leader of the House in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, co-sponsoring that resolution. That resolution was created and lobbied successfully for by Charles Keating, the most notorious fraud CEO looter of the entire savings and loan debacle, right? And on top of that, the incoming Speaker of the House would be in political science jargon in the United States. Back in the day, these were known as strong speakers. They were super powerful, bend you to the will or crush you types. We had the administration, the Reagan administration at this time. This is 1984. Completely opposed to re-regulating the savings and loan industry and trying to pack the commissioners that ran our agency with people literally selected by Charles Keating to give Charles Keating a majority control of the agency. We had OMB, which is the president's rod and staff, to go after, in particular, what used to be known as independent regulatory agencies. Trump is going to try to kill that, and the judiciary probably will largely kill that under the unitary executive concept. Threaten to make criminal referrals against the head of our agency on the grounds, air quotes if you can't see what I'm doing, that we were closing too many insolvent savings and loans, right? And we had the third most powerful, according to political scientists, trade association, the Savings and Loan League, that had multiple members. All right, so 500 CEOs guaranteed that within 48 hours of the call by the trade association, they would be in Washington, where they were on a first name basis with at least 4 members of Congress and both senators because of their political contributions. And they would steamroll through Congress, right? I still have the scar tissue of all these things. The point of all this, if we tried to go force to force, we wouldn't simply fail. We'd be crushed in the first 15 seconds, and there'd be nothing left. There'd be dust and pink mist where we used to be, right? So we couldn't fight them that way. And now what I'm going to say is not a magic beans thing. It doesn't instantly transform life. This was a strategy of 9 years. Right? We were in the trenches long term. But we realized, we also had the media against us, right? Yeah, particularly the Washington Post, which in Washington is a big friggin' deal in that era. The Washington Post was incredibly influential. And of course, the Wall Street Journal was against us and such because we were
Mark, I'm going to hit pause for just 1 second until we come back.
Okay.
And go.
All right. So fundamentally, we were re-regulating in the Reagan administration where that was the worst conceivable sin, right? So what we realized is you couldn't go force against force because we would be crushed. So we adopted an alternative strategy. And that alternative strategy is not magic. It took 9 years to be fully successful, but it transformed all of the political stuff in which we were going to be absolutely annihilated. And the critical thing was litigation. We had independent litigation authority. It's just a little jargony. Normally, federal agencies have to litigate through the Department of Justice, and the agency doesn't control that litigation. right? The Department of Justice can say, no, sorry, we don't want to bring that action, or no, we're not really going to defend that action. We're going to demand that you settle it, type of thing. But we had independent litigation authority. And because the government is idiotic in many ways, we were, particularly OMB, we were saving money by having very few federal employees who were litigators. In fact, my total staff when I started was six.
Wow.
We would soon have a docket of 10,000 cases. Okay. This is stupid, right? But this is stupid from the conservatives. That's what OMB is, the super conservative folks with, Ronald Reagan in mind who think you save money by not having federal employees. And instead, I had, and I was 32, a budget of $100 million in 1984 dollars to hire outside counsel. Now, outside counsel is not magic. You have to worry about all kinds of things, conflicts of interest. And in other places, it's often nasty political or slimy, help your own university or something like that, or your area of the country. We didn't play those games, right? We just did our national thing because we had cases everywhere. And we had a policy that said if you get over $1 million a year in fees from us, you can't represent savings and loans, period, in anything else. So it was an easy conflict rule. If you were just a small bit player, of course, we had obviously looser conflict standards where you could still represent some other thrift not involved in litigation with us. All right. We then brought hundreds of actions against the most elite executives and the most elite law firms and the most elite audit firms. And those complaints sometimes also had a lot of politics in where, effort had been made to prevent us from having successful litigation through political intervention. We would certainly mention that stuff in the complaint. And I personally, one of the biggest things I did, one of the biggest time sinks I did, was explain all of this to not just national media, but local media and state media, wherever we were bringing these cases. And slowly, this had an enormous effect in which the cases sounded very similar because there are particular fraud schemes that work better. So eventually folks started to get this, that this was not a problem of weird economic forces. It was an old-fashioned problem of elite CEOs looting their firms and such. And that discredited all this political stuff that I was talking about, right? All this ability to get Congress, the administration, the media to come after us. Well, suddenly that looked really sleazy, right? These were all folks intervening to try to prevent us from bringing to justice some of the most powerful thieves in world history. And that didn't play well. And we knew we were winning with that we had actually flipped this like Judah-like move of their power when as soon as we would bring the civil suits and explain to the local media why we were doing it, the politicians that had received the political contributions from the savings and loans would rush to donate the money to charity and such. And as I've said, there was a particularly sleazy Illinois congressman, very powerful, really in the tank with these fraudsters and with Keating. He started wearing a button that was 6 inches in diameter saying jail the S&L crooks. And at that point, you know that you've truly succeeded. So we have this utterly outrageous action by President Trump. And in the last discussion we had, I noted that elite fraudsters normally try to hide the fraud. But we had gotten to the stage with President Trump and President Musk that they not only don't hide it, they want it to be known. They want to flaunt their power and their willingness to use that power in ways that in any previous time, including Trump 1, the first administration, would have brought just a crescendo of resignations and condemnation and such. Here, they want to intimidate, but also they want to revel, right? They hate their opponents. They want to revel in, we will screw you over, and there's nothing you can do about it. And they want to solicit bribes. So the openness of the corruption is actually a sophisticated fraud scheme in this context. Now, when you are running this huge corruption system, who do you identify as the really significant potential folks that might do something like us in the savings and loan era? Well, in America, the first thing that comes to mind is the really powerful law firms connected with your political opponents. And three of these law firms Trump promptly went after in a way that there has been nothing like it in U.S. history, where he set out to destroy three very large, very powerful law firms. And again, he's not picking on the little guys first. He wants the message to be, I can crush the giants. So all you regular folks, you better not do anything that displeases me, because you will be annihilated. And I was thinking of, well, wait a minute, we could flip this around. Again, if we try to go force on force against this leading kleptocrat, or these leading kleptocrats, plural, we'll just get crushed. But we have all these state attorney generals. And many of them are quite reasonable, competent folks. And as I've mentioned before, these kinds of lawsuits, they make money. They make net huge amounts of money. The more of these suits we make, the bigger the surplus will be in the states or the attorney general's offices, right? And again, you got to do it right to minimize the risk of scandals that people can attack you for. But these counsel really are very, very good. And the traditional problem with the state AGs is not quality, it's quantity. And that's why you see so many actions in the modern era where the state AGs cooperate so that they can bring a critical mass of attorneys to bring these cases. But that, so example, in the run-up to the great financial crisis, the Con interviews a number of these attorney generals, including Mark Dan and some of the key assistants in those cases. But typically, those task forces could only go after one opponent at a time, right? Even with the massed resources of dozens of AG's offices, they had very limited ability. But now we have Covington and Perkins Coie, and we thought we might have Paul Weiss. Now, footnote, Paul Weiss just caved in one of the most spectacular, cowardly fails of all time that will besmirch forever the reputation of this firm. And of course, it has just burnished the power of Presidents Trump and Musk. to do these things, right? But we can bring these actions against the major corporate fraudsters and make money. We can improve state laws to make it much more effective in bringing a number of these actions because in some of these states, the legislatures are actually potentially reasonable, and we could develop model laws that would very much burnish the power of the state AGs to bring these actions. And just very recently, we've had this incredible suppression of the key whistleblower on Meta, right? On Zuckerberg, in which Meta ran to an arbitrator and got a purported order ex parte, I mean, without her being present. They claim they gave her notice, forbidding her to, make public these incredible abuses by Meta. Well, a number of those things would be actionable by state attorney generals, but on top of that, state attorney generals and state legislators, through their committees, can do testimony under subpoenas. And under subpoenas, those agreements that the big corporations force on people that say, you can't sue us, you have to go to an arbitrator, and arbitrators are badly, badly rigged system in the United States of America with lots of economic statistics on that and such. And so if you get the subpoenas, you can ask the questions and get the testimony of those people without potentially exposing them to disastrous penalties by these arbitrators. So that too is an aspect of the things that we can do. Again, my point is we've been dealt incredible supply of lemons. If we just do things the conventional way, Trump and Musk are going to prevail. It's not going to be easy. There is no sure way to stop them, but the best available way would be to hire firms like Perkins Coie, who have, really wonderful reputations in many ways, to bring these cases in which there could be a win-win, in which the firm could end up getting, not being destroyed, which is what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to bankrupt these law firms, and the public in these states could also benefit. Anyway, and you can see how that, as I say, fits together with whistleblowers. And that's the other thing we need to do. I will leave that emphasis to another program. But there are things we can do to incentivize and shield whistleblowers to come forward with the critical information. And one of the revelations in this recent book on Zuckerberg and Meta is how much he admired the worst of the worst folks in Silicon Valley with this slogan about break things, right? Move fast and break things, because that's a euphemism for breaking the law. So that's my suggestion.
Well, and again, just the beginning of it, and that's why you remind me of Obi-Wan Kenobi as you were laying that out, and the good force against the evil empire, Bill. I mean, Mark, I want to, before we go on to June, who'll come back in, I want to talk to Mark because Bill brought up some incredible things that you've been in the midst of a good portion of your career, obviously. But to respond to that, I want to ask a kind of a setup that hopefully you'll address as you're answering all of the things that you're formulating based on what Bill just said. So the last couple of days, we've seen things like I happened to catch an interview with Michael Lewis, obviously the writer journalist that's done The Big Short. He's done Moneyball. He's done all of these things. He's very well known, but he's done a book recently on really the integrity of civil servants and proclamating, how tremendous an asset to the American people that these people are, in contrast to all of the fraud that he's shown on Wall Street for the last, 15, 20 years, right? But one of the things he said by what Bill just addressed was all the whistleblowers that he was dealing with, they don't want to talk anymore because they're absolutely really terrified at this stage of where we are in the game with DOGE. That's just probably one of millions of things I'd want to maybe infuse into this, but I'll let you run with it. Mark, what's your reaction to what Bill said, and what's your thoughts on the whole thing right now?
I think Bill's right. I think the attorneys general have a strong role to play in this. I am less confident, having come out of the state government and out of the state legislature before I was attorney general, in the ability or the immunity that those folks in the legislatures have from the very same kleptocracy and corruption that has infected, that Trump and Musk have perfected it. But this type of pay for play government was really developed in the state at state government levels in Ohio, with the Republicans over the last 20 years, and before that, a very powerful Democratic speaker named Vern Rife, who and legislation in our state doesn't move unless it's paid for, or it will advance somebody's interest in winning a Republican primary. State AGs are also, and a perfect example is this. Yesterday, the State Teachers Retirement Board was coerced by Attorney General Yost here, our Republican Attorney General, into filing against Target on a stock fraud case based on their DEI practices. Now, that has no so in what people need to understand. And I was trying to explain to a reporter today who doesn't seem to be interested, unfortunately, but the is that those if you're a member, if you own stock in a company and somebody else brings a lawsuit, and Florida has already brought this lawsuit against Target for the damage to their stock allegedly caused by their DEI practices. You will benefit from that without doing anything at all. All you have to do is wait. And if there's a successful case that's brought by the representative plaintiff, then you'll get notice of it. And if you think the settlement or the judgment is fair, you can accept it, or you can opt out and bring your own case at that point in time. So there's absolutely no value to the retired teachers in Ohio in suing Target. Any benefit they would get from that, they would have gotten anyway. But what the benefit is twofold. One, it's an issue for the other use of the words AG. We also used to talk about aspiring governor. So the governor or Attorney General Yost is, of course, running in the Republican primary for governor. So this DEI stuff is going to help him win that primary. But there's a secondary layer here where the firms that he has hired to represent the state, and because it's a huge pension fund, they have a very good chance of being named lead plaintiff in this case. And those firms will then reap millions of dollars in fees for themselves, with no additional benefit to the retired teachers in the state. And you can, I actually drew literally drew a picture for the reporter of the contributions that those firms made to Yost, to the state Republican Party and the Republican Attorney General's Association. So this kind of corruption, and it's been a little more. It's certainly less transparent than what's going on in Washington right now, but it's been pretty transparent over the last few years that's the expectation. If you want to represent the state in a stock fraud case, you have to contribute to the Attorney General. And so those things are for sale, and so not every AG and not every legislature is exercising independent judgment. They're to some extent, at a smaller scale, doing some of the same things that are going on in DC. But again, they're a little ashamed of it, which is not the case with what's going on in Washington. I mean, it's so yes, I think the AGs can be helpful. I feel for, and for me to feel bad for tall building lawyers, who are my opponents in every case that I bring on behalf of consumers around the country, is a big stretch for me. But I do feel bad for the owners, the managing partners, and the equity partners in these tall building firms that are being attacked by Trump this way. But at the end of the day, they have a duty to their profession. We didn't get into this business to be wimps and to roll over. I mean, and what does it tell their clients, if they're going to roll over? I mean, I think that they may be doomed by the way that Trump is trying to drive them out of business, but they're absolutely going to be doomed if these other firms do what Paul Weiss did yesterday and capitulate. Because nobody wants a capitulating lawyer representing them in their litigation. I mean, it's just not what people want. So you know what? It's gonna be costly. But there are lots of lawyers. I mean, how many whistleblowers did we talk to who were lawyers during the financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, Patrick, that gave up, that lost their jobs, that lost their savings, that
right.
couldn't get a job,
That's right.
because of the things that they did during that time. Where these guys have made millions of dollars in this business. The average tall building law firm partner makes north of $2 million a year. Equity partners. You know what? They're in a position to take a stand. And for God's sakes, let's hope they do. I mean, if the bar doesn't take a stand, I mean, what's left? And I attended one time a legal training, a continuing legal education training put on by a guy who was a scholar about the lawyers in Nazi Germany. And everything the Nazis did was approved by lawyers. All of the race laws, in fact, many of them were based on laws in southern states from the United. They were actually drawn from U.S. laws to some extent. But all those things were the lawyers were sucked into that. And frankly, if the lawyers had resisted in that time frame, and I think that was a lesson of this continuing legal education, and these folks know better. I believe that these lawyers should resist in the same way. They need to resist and say no, and say not take this. And I think their clients will respect that. I really do. I mean, the ones that are worried about the government turning on them are the ones that have been buying their way through government for the last 4 decades. And so and if their successes, if they have less success in buying the government, I don't feel so bad about that. But the lawyers, the state bars, the disciplinary councils, I mean, we need to be really aggressive. And there's a group headed by a former state attorney general called Lawyers Defending Democracy. And they're very actively looking for opportunities to bring disciplinary complaints. They were the ones that brought the Giuliani complaint in the DC bar, and to seek to have these guys disbarred, because that is not what our profession is supposed to be about, and that is not what our ethics rules allow and require. Allowing anybody to influence our independent judgment on behalf of our clients is simply the worst thing a lawyer can do in the world, and they're doing it. And at least this one firm is doing it, and the other ones that are resisting, I give credit to their willingness to do that. They have the resources to withstand this. They have the resources they're much better positioned than a guy like me to fight this fight and to win. And you know what? At the end of the day, they're all talented people, and if they fail, they can go work someplace else and do something else. I mean, anything's better than capitulating to an aspiring despot, which is exactly what they're trying to force them to do. And so yes, I'm hopeful, and I do believe the state AGs can help keep those firms afloat, as Bill suggests, and I think that's a good idea. Again, the potential for contingency recovery depends on the ability to get it from ultimately from the federal government, who's going to be the target of a lot of these lawsuits. And so, depending on how good a job they do at controlling those levers, they may cut off that flow of recovery money for those lawyers. But and state treasuries and certainly don't have with the coming recession that Trump is triggering. They're not going to have the resources because they rely on sales tax and income tax. They're not going to have the resources to fund those cases. I do think that can be a part of it, but I think that I think the private bar also has to step up here, and identify, opportunities to bring cases that will have an impact on this stuff, and to figure out ways to get paid to do it, which is always a challenge, for lawyers who do the kinds of things that I do. But it is, I think it's incumbent on us. We may be the last line of defense, for the country. And I'm disappointed. Last night I literally wanted to cry when that notice came up about the Paul Weiss capitulation to Trump. And it's not what exactly that they did. It's the fact that they did it at all. It's the fact that they bent a knee, exactly like I mean, I think Trump thinks he's in Game of Thrones. And you have to come and before I'll let your kingdom live, you're going to have to come and bend a knee to me. And look at everything they're doing. Look, all this bullshit about tariffs being, great for building the American economy. Tariffs are great for one thing: exceptions, and the exceptions can be bought. And Trump has laid out a perfect storm. So what you'll start to see is the people that are buying his Bitcoin, or contributing to his various entities, or building Trump hotels, or all the other things that all the other channels that he's left very transparently for people to put money in his pocket. Those are the industries that are going to get the exemptions, or individual companies that will get those exemptions. It is absolutely a brilliant fraud and fundraising scheme, and he's creating a whole marketplace that's not regulated at all. By the way, I mean, there's no SEC overseeing people buying their way out of tariffs. I mean, there's no agency that's designed for that. I mean, I suppose the U.S. Justice Department, but they're in a different business these days. I mean, they're too busy, trying to undo pardons of nonviolent drug dealers and other important things like defending people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. So who's going to police them? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know that there's a mechanism to do that. I gotta believe at some point that people will, if they understand it, they will react to it in the way that I'm reacting to it. The problem is this: even in the coverage of the Paul Weiss capitulation yesterday, the reporting about it in the New York Times, and I canceled my Washington Post subscription, so I don't know what that said. And the little bit of that I watched on television was full of both sidism. That as somehow there is zero credibility to this executive order to a president. It is probably the most unconstitutional act. Well, there have been many, but one of the most unconstitutional acts in the history of the United States. That a sitting president would issue an executive order, literally discriminating against the right of a particular group of lawyers to practice law. That's what that is. And there's not a court or a judge in the world, even Trump appointed judges to some extent, who are, because at the end of the day, I don't know that in the last term they understood what they were going to do in this term. I think this has all been cooked up in the last 4 years, or largely cooked up in the last 4 years. I mean, they laid some of the groundwork, but they certainly, the judges they appointed, I found to be actually pretty reasonable, not terribly smart, but very, very, very reasonable judges willing to listen to both sides and to hear arguments. If you've read the Constitution, you can't possibly find that ordering this group of lawyers not to be barred from applying their trade in the United States anywhere is constitutional in any way. And so they should be in court, not in the fucking Oval Office, and pleading their case. That's the place to do it. And there are at least 5 members of the Supreme Court that are capable of actually enforcing the Constitution at this point in time. Unfortunately, there aren't 6, and there may not be 5, but there are 5 at least so far, that would see that. And at the end of the day, those guys all came out of those tall building firms. I mean, you don't get to be on the U.S. Supreme Court and there was plenty wrong, by the way, with the last 3 administrations and how they last 5 administrations and how they the pay for play was rampant but not transparent. But you don't get there unless you represent big companies and have the approval of the the elders of the American Bar Association. So those folks come out of those firms. I just can't see a world in which they're gonna allow an executive order curtailing their practice to possibly stand. And I don't know why they haven't been more aggressive in that arena. So they've got a duty to help themselves, Bill. I mean, I think the AG should help them too. I agree, but they should help themselves, and they need to stand up like real Americans and fight.
Oh, absolutely. My focus is not on the law firm.
Yeah,
my focus is on the public, right?
Right.
We found that bringing these kinds of actions was the only way to beat this kind of entrenched power. And as I say, it wasn't magic. It was a 9 to 10 year effort that finally turned it around. That's what I want.
Yes.
I don't need, and we had no scandals in the funding of the attorneys. And you'll like this one, Mark. I came from Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey.
Yeah, one of my local tall building firms. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Type of thing. So we don't need to get, for example, all 22 Democratic AGs or 23-ish if you count the District of Columbia and such. Yeah. We need just 1 or 2 places that will run it clean and run it super vigorous. I don't care so much to get money to the firm. I want them not collapsing. And your point is absolutely right. I agree fully. These are great winner cases for the law firms, and they would establish your reputation in precisely the way the client would like to hire you. He'll take on the president of the United States, or she'll take on the president of the United States and, Musk at the same time. However, I can tell you from within those firms that the way they view it is even if they win those cases, their firm will die.
And it may, but I'd rather go down fighting.
Absolutely. I would certainly do that. And I'm going to.
But yeah,
June.
Can I answer the question for June here? I want to set this up for June because so much of what you guys covered really was echoing what I've heard from June the last 3 weeks, as a matter of fact. But I want to reiterate from, for the viewer and for the folks that we have to get to the podcasters to understand the power of what's ruminating from this conversation is what I've known as the producer of the con, first and foremost, that what I just heard from Mark, June, was that in what you had laid out before, in what Bill reminded us that he was up against, at that incredible cataclysmic time period that I think was even more than I even considered when you think of everything they were up against during the S&L crisis. We just weren't saturated with 24/7 media at the time, so we probably didn't see it the same way we see DOGE now, even though we see step and repeat of the whole thing. But Bill made this point, right, guys? He said that not only did they have to go after the media and deal with that beast that was coming after him because of the Reagan administration, but they had to go after, not just the white collar fraudsters, but then also the law firms that represented them. And that's what, June, you were talking about last time, that there needs to be a pound of flesh extracted from these law firms that are playing in these ways that are enabling the corruption. And that made me think about this as you roll through this, June. It seems like we're at this devil's crossroads where the Faustian bargain of the white shoe law firms for decades have been dealing with the big money that have played ball in a horrific way only to bring it home to roost for themselves, right? Because it's just like, I mean, we've seen this lesson throughout history. You guys recall Mark had referenced the attorneys during the Reich, but it was also the industrialists that ended up playing roulette with their futures as well. And we're seeing kind of a step and repeat of that. And then the last thing I want to calibrate as you move into where you're going to go here, June. Again, I want to reiterate to the audience, June Carbone has laid out exactly what everybody is talking about in the mainstream, but she has the details of everything that's going to be within the DEI strata of this, not to mention I want to call it the bullying effort in terms of marginalizing the most vulnerable groups. But this has been kind of a play forever with corporate America. But further, this sort of mentality of the strong man, right? Because everything that Mark and Bill have been talking about is they're going after the strong men at these elite institutions, be it law firms or in giant corporations, or now the presidency, because of all of the things that you bring, to this conversation and so forth that everybody's talking about, but they don't know exactly how to identify it and also give us a way out of this. So I'll just leave that up as kind of an open-ended way for you to jump in.
Okay, so this is exactly right. And if you want autocracy, the first thing you have to do is at least neuter, if not kill, all the lawyers. Shakespeare did get that right. And I wanted to write a piece called Lawless. Leah Littman at the University of Michigan has beaten me to it. She's talking about the Supreme Court, but I would have been talking about corporate America. And the lawlessness of corporate America starts with the marginalization of lawyers. So let me start with a story from Bill from his days with Squire Sanders. And Bill liked to tell the story. We used to go to this prom, the annual dinner dance in Cleveland. Bill was working for the Washington office of a Cleveland law firm. And in Cleveland, in that era, in Ohio, in the 80s, there were three big corporate law firms. And the partners at these three law firms had lunch once a week at the country club. And if a big company wanted to do business in Cleveland, Ohio, they had to hire one of the three law firms. And the law firm partners had the ability to say no. No, we won't represent you on something we think is unethical. Even though we won't represent you, we collectively, all three of us, will say no to things we think are outside the bounds, whatever they happen to be. What changed? Well, a lot of things changed, but the immediate thing, and Charlie Keating, at the height of the savings and loan crisis, biggest crook in the country on savings and loan days, was among
From Ohio.
from Ohio.
Cincinnati. I was going to claim him earlier, but I thought we have enough to worry about here.
So one of the things he did was to, okay, so the Cleveland lawyers won't represent me. I'll get somebody else to represent me. And indeed, when the banking lawyers wouldn't represent him on some things, because what he was doing was illegal as a violation of banking law and would get both the lawyers and the client in trouble, he went to non-banking lawyers. There's a whole story about Jones Day that Bill can tell you about, where they did Keating's bidding by hiring their litigators who applied litigation rules not to disclose information. But the banking rules are different. No banking lawyer would do that because they knew they'd get in a lot of trouble. And Jones Day got in a lot of trouble with the federal government seizing their client trust accounts, which created a crisis for the firm. Okay, so the federal government acting on law firms is not unprecedented. This was the good guys seizing
That's
the.
Kay Scholler.
Oh, it was Kay Scholler. I said Jones Day. I'm sorry. I have it mixed up because it's Cleveland, but it's Kay Scholler. And so I'm sorry about that. But Kay Scholler was the one that didn't got in a lot of trouble.
Jones Day did too.
Bill says Jones stated to, but for other things.
Well,
That's
in,
tangent.
in further non-defense of Jones Day, they were the only firm that capitulated in Trump's first term to him.
Okay, so what's changed? A big thing that's changed, aside from the fact that all these firms are no longer Cleveland firms, they're global firms and they're massive. If you say, I was on a conversation last night with some of my lawyer friends, and here's what they told me. Why did Paul Weiss cave? What Paul Weiss was really afraid of wasn't the stuff that could be litigated. What the Trump administration was telling them was, we won't return your phone calls. It's very hard to represent powerful clients if the entire government is saying all the agencies are not going to return your phone calls. They had a 2-hour meeting hammering this out with Trump personally invested in all the details. So this is not some DOGE employee, unless you think Trump is one. But they also said we didn't agree to do anything we wouldn't have agreed to do anyway. This is performative. But the real fear is the power of the federal government being used against them. So that's what you've got taking place. And I want to emphasize what these big firms are like, because we also talked about Mark Elias in this phone call. And Mark Elias, used to be with one of the firms and now has his own firm. And, Perkins Coie, which is the original target of Trump rage. And Mark Elias makes a lot of money from private clients who pay, and from attorney's fees he gets in the litigation he brings. It's not like he's doing this on a pro bono basis, but he doesn't make as much money as other partners who are rainmakers at a firm like Perkins Coie. Now, what that means, and this is one of the keys to the shift in law practice, again, over the last 40 years, not overnight with the Trump administration, is it used to be law firm partners, like corporate executives, stayed with one company for life. That's no longer true. The risk of defection is huge. That is, your biggest rainmakers, if the government isn't returning their phone calls because the wrong firm name is on the letterhead, they will defect and they will take an entire body of practice with them and they will go to another firm or set up their own firm. And the biggest rainmakers, that is the people who bring in the most money, are the most powerful people within the firm. And if you've got a Charlie Keating, and the crooks pay more than people are honest for the most part, because they know they have to get lawyers to do things that are not in the lawyer's interest to do. So they typically pay more. Well, a person can make their career by landing a client like Charlie Keating, as long as they don't go to jail and representing him. And what they end up with is a huge body of money that gives them either the ability to extract a higher percentage of the overall profits of the firm they're with, or the ability to take a practice group and move to another firm where they up the percentage of the proceeds they get to keep. So what's happened is law firms no longer say no to major important clients because the clients are way too able to shop around to get whomever they want. But it also makes the big firms vulnerable to the kind of concerted federal attack that Trump is orchestrating. And, you've got Steve Bannon, I think it was Steve Bannon today saying, yeah, going after these guys is exactly what we wanted to do. Now, let me comment a little bit before we go on the state level. Because, my co-authors and I did an article after the Dobbs decision on abortion, where we did a national 50-state survey looking at the support for child rearing following pregnancy. And we discovered, not so surprisingly, red states were among the worst. But what we didn't know, because we don't normally write about federalism, but the federalism literature is full of this, is it used to be this idea that if you left things to the states were independent actors, they were closer to the people, the laboratories of experimentation, etc. What we found is the poorer the state, the more that it was owned lock, stock, and barrel by industry. that the poorer the state, the more you have a part-time legislature, the more the primary is everything. $5,000 can flip a typical primary. State legislators are terrified of being primaried. They're not in most of the country, they're not so afraid of losing the general election. And given that the poorer the state, the less well-staffed they are, the more they simply enact whatever the big corporate national lobbying groups hand them. When you look at Idaho's laws on abortion, they were written by the National Right to Life Committee. When you look at gun laws, they're written overwhelmingly by the NRA. So that you have very powerful actors who, if they don't outright bribe legislators, can threaten them with primaries. And it doesn't cost much to primary a state legislator. So state legislatures, finally, far from being close to the people, laboratories of democracy, are owned to a much greater degree than Congress is by influential lobbying groups that have targeted them. And state legislation varies less from state to state in areas lobbyists care about than it once used to. And so my final point, a plug, there are lawyers bringing qui tam actions to try to confront some of what the federal government is doing, but Bill knows more about them than I do, so I'm going to stop there.
I'm going to
and one of the problems with I want to add two footnotes to term limits is another huge problem in the state legislatures.
Yes.
The lobbyists are the only people left in Columbus that have institutional memory and believe me, their interest isn't the general public's best interest. So yeah, you're exactly right. It is, and that's this whole thing with the education department in this concept, which they can't really do anyway. But that even if they were successful at it, is only going to benefit private schools because their lobbyists are the ones that now control the legislatures of the country.
Look, I'm just going to ask you both and Bill, even though this is rhetorical, but just for the audience to get a feel for this, because we don't know how it works in social media. I mean, the focal point or the fulcrum of these conversations is to get people that I have access to that are larger podcasters, that have bigger audiences, as well as people in the industry that will have to be enlightened to understand that people like you exist, first and foremost. But what I need the general audience to try to wrap their heads around is, okay, look, what am I dealing with now? I'm dealing with a country that seems to have a lawless president and nobody able to stop him, and nobody, because of what I'm hearing day in, day out in my social media and what I'm seeing in mainstream media, is that no one can stop what is happening right now, and it's only going to go from bad to worse. And so here we have a collective group of people that have been fighting these fights forever, and they have resolutions and they're identifying something, but yet we're at a different chapter in the story. I don't know if it's the final chapter or is it the beginning of a new book. And I guess that's where we are, because ultimately, like Bill said, but Mark, I think you really nailed this and I want to hear more of it. Look, man, we got to have a system of integrity. It's the ethics. And, June she had laid out the fact that these huge law firms are now global, and it's really about the money-making enterprise, and the money is the bottom line, and the money's going to come from whomever, and suddenly democracy's done. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a supremacy of laws, because what matters is the money. And of course, when you understand what we've done in the con, and then ultimately what you guys have done in your career, and I'll set you up with this, Mark, I brought to you initially that I thought the con was the ultimate key tam. But then what you pointed out to me was, look, this was all public information. You're not bringing anything new to the government. And the government had actually admitted everything that we showed in the con, in the civil settlements that Eric Holder rolled out with the DOJ, effectively saying almost everything we did, but without the details that we provided. And then, of course, mainstream media completely dropped the ball on what actually took place, and then ultimately what the meaning was of when we floated the financial institutions that destroyed the world. So, I mean, this has got to be, level 5, hair on fire. It's now or never sort of scenario, is it not, Mark?
Yeah, it is. And by the way, the problem with Ketam in with these urgent problems is that it is a secret process, both in states and in the federal government. And so, if you violate the secrecy of the agent, whoever you're suing, who's ripping off the federal government, then you lose your ability to collect your bounty as a whistleblower. And so, it's kind of ill suited for this moment in time. I was actually looking at federal mandamus law, um, because that may be a more direct way. And then let's invite the confrontation where the judge orders Trump to rescind an executive order. Let's have that moment, and let's get that to the Supreme Court, and let's see how determined they are, or how willing they are to empower this guy as a despot. I don't think that they are. I think they look. They want what the Chamber of Commerce and and the whole Lewis Powell memo that we've talked about. They want all that stuff, and they're getting it. Okay, they're getting it in spades. But they picked the wrong delivery system, and this delivery system is going to blow. They're going to get it, and there's not going to be a country like they thought they had, or freedom. And by the way, these corporations won't have any more freedom than we will. And so they're going to get it for a minute, but their messenger, if they continue to allow this Frankenstein monster to do his work, will destroy them too, like in Nazi Germany.
Well, and Bill, just to keep tee you up for this final point, because we're running out of time. But look, I saw Pam Bondi this week, and again, I have a sense of who Pam Bondi is and what her history is over the last 15 years. She's threatening Tesla owners with terrorism charges, right? And I'm not talking about the firebomb. I'm talking about the ones that are protesting, from what I understand. And I don't know what the actual details are further than what I've just been hearing in mainstream media, but we've got the Department of Justice acting on behalf of a lawless president, weaponizing the law to go after people protesting a lawless president.
Yeah, we have not only the federal government, we have a bunch of red states. And this is my point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are all kinds of limitations on what I'm suggesting, but there is a full-blown blizzard of abuse of process coming from the federal government and from the state AGs. And we have to be there to counter that, and we have to think much more innovatively. I mean, what do we need as changes in states where we actually could get changes in the law, right? Not existing law on qui tam, for example,
Right.
to make these things work. The second thing is, let me piggyback on what an aspect of June saying, that key things for me that came out of this whistleblower book about Meta and Zuckerberg and all them types is, on 3 occasions, Zuckerberg was presented with horrific acts of lawlessness, many of which were fatal or ended up in sexual assaults in places like Burma. And in at least 2 of these, allegedly, according to the author, who was in these meetings with him, his response was, "Hey, that's great. Let's do that more." I didn't know we had that capacity. Great. Let's violate the law. According to the whistleblower, he hears what Uber has done, that it was a whole series of illegal actions. I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of illegal actions. Their business plan was violate the law. And Zuckerberg's response was, "That's my plan." That's what's coming down the road. That's why we cannot do business as usual.
Right. But that law is supposed to protect them too.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the most sorry people are the ones that are going to be most active in this next few years.
Oh, I agree with you. I agree that this is going to be terrible for business ultimately,
Right.
because when dishonesty becomes the norm in business, it is really bad for the economy. That's how we got the savings and loan debacle. That's how we got the great financial crisis. That's how we got the Enron era fraud. But this one
Yeah.
is going to potentially surpass all of those by a considerable margin unless either they just succeed in blowing up the economy so quickly, right? The great financial crisis took 15 years to build.
Right.
They might only have four. But then again, if you believe that he's going to leave office in 4 years,
Right.
I don't think that's certain in any way. And I don't think it means that he's going to be reelected as opposed to pronounced, God King or some such thing.
So what I've heard is that professional attorneys have to stand on the right side of the law. They have to espouse integrity. They have to join and force together. They have to have a plan to be like water against the force. And they've got to maneuver in the way that Bill Black proved was possible, and what obviously Mark Dan proved was possible in both their great eras, both in the savings and loan crisis and in the great financial crisis. And
Patrick, they need to develop spines. They
Right.
need to discover
Well,
where they put their
and
spine.
right. And the rest of us lawyers need to hold them accountable. We need to shame them. They can still be shamed because I went to law school with these guys. Bill went to law school with these guys and worked with them at Squire Sanders and some of my dearest friends. And at the end of the day, they need to be reminded of what the lawyer's role is in society.
And imagine
And I
June went to Yale. Imagine how
Yeah.
many of them she went with.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yes. Right, right. I have the non-equity partners went to Case Western with me, but they're but they're but they're there. And at the end of the day, these folks can't do their work unless the lawyers that work for them show up, and unless and they can't exist in the environment. They got to worry about the judicial branch starting to turn on them too, because those judges are scared for their lives right now.
it's remarkable, and everything I learned on the playground in the fourth grade stands true with everything that you guys are teaching me, man. You either step up and you fight on your toes, but you can't be on your heels. And the collective group of the new untouchables, which is of course echoing the untouchables, this fight is constant throughout history. It's constant throughout American history. And Bill always taught us that it's not necessary to hope to persevere, but what we have to conglomerate around is a critical mass of people that understand that we have people in our system that can fight on our behalf, because what Trump and DOGE and Elon are doing is just what happens on the playground with bullies. They're just forcing people into situations to make them scared, to make them non-react through a lot of different variables, whether it's, taking their job away, which is plenty to rug pull someone's ability to survive, whether it's somebody's firm and everything else. But these firms, like Mark said, a lot of the times have been playing ball with the bad guys and haven't been standing for justice for a long time anyway. And yes, that's complicated, but to what ends, guys? It's like, we need freedom, we need liberty, and we need justice for all as the core components if this country is going to survive this onslaught of what the corruption has been for the past 15 years that's created this fascism that we're all in the midst of. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to wait for this to bury us any further. I'm doing everything I can to bring everybody together to understand that these gentlemen and June Carbone and others that will bring to the table have the ability to move in the right direction, but we just have to support them, get behind them, put the public pressure, and get to the journalists, those that don't know this story, so that this can start seeping through social media and everywhere else, that there's going to be, let's call it is it the cavalry? Or in this case, what is the metaphor for the guys that rise up against, who are we in this case, guys? Because I'm trying to figure the right time in history.
The famous phrase in the military centuries ago was you wanted generals that rode to the sound of the guns, not away from them.
Bingo. I like that. That's a beautiful way to end it. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you and June for joining us. And I will, again, I'll get this to everybody on our panel and to other people, and we'll hopefully grow this and we'll get it out to everybody we can. And I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All the best.